So when I was starting out learning how to code in Django, I found using URLs to be rather frustrating. It didn't always work exactly the way I wanted, and if I missed one little piece, the URL would just be completely broken. And then when I would try to reverse that URL, it was madness. So in this one, we're going to actually discuss how URL or regular expressions work in Django. Now, the important thing here is to understand that regular expressions are used in all kinds of programming. It's not just in Python. It's certainly not just in Django URLs. But what they allow us to do is to pick out pieces of text and to verify what those pieces are prior to ever touching anything else. So in our case, we verify that, let's say, for instance, you're passing an ID to get a blog post. You want a specific ID or a specific year or a specific slug. We want to make sure that those things or that format is already there before it moves on to the next step. This becomes more clear when you see it in action, but the main thing here is what a regular expression can do is it can validate our URL prior to doing anything else, which is really cool, and it actually saves us a lot of time in the back end and a lot of time for our users. So if the URL that they're asking for isn't matched, just a 404 comes up, a page not found comes up, and that's something that's really cool. Now, like many of these videos, we're going to be working off of a blog post, which is right here, and that blog post will actually show you all of this stuff. So that's going to be the latest and greatest version of this based off the questions that we might get from you. So go ahead and open that up right now, and at the same time, let's go ahead and jump into the code and talk about it. Now, into the post, of course, I'm going to assume a few things. You have some Django experience, like try Django 1.11, and you are on this guide. But the main thing here is understanding that we're only covering a little bit about Django. This is more about regular expressions and just some of the basics as they relate to pattern matching in any given URL. So we're going to actually open up Python and just go through a lot of these things. And I'm just going to copy and paste a lot of this stuff because we don't really need to retype it, do we? So I'm in a Django project and I have a virtual environment activated and I'm just going into my Django shell. That's not necessary. You can go into just a Python shell and even in an older version of Python. But as we see from here, I'm using 3.6.4 and I believe I have Django version 2 and up. I mean, it might be 0.0.3, but that's not that important. Okay, so what a regular expression is it's a string or a regular expression pattern that we compare against another string or another Python string. And that's it. I mean, you can do all sorts of things with this. You can do replacement. You can do, extraction. So like actually grabbing things out of a string. And that's actually what the URLs do or the URL patterns do. So let's go ahead and grab some of these things right here. I'm going to go ahead and copy this first few lines and bring it in. We've got our matching digits regular expression, also known as regex. So R-E-G-E-X, you'll see that a lot of times, or regex, right? So importing RE is the regular expressions module that's built into Python, and these are common URL paths you may or may not see. Now, intuitively, looking at this right here, which of these 4 paths actually match this regular expression? What's your intuition with that? It might be a little bit challenging, but this right here shows us that it's digits only. So that piece is the key part. This part right here actually names what matches in here, right? So it actually names, 1, 2, 34 as the keyword argument of ID. So to get this ID, we can actually use this method that I created here to grab it for us. Now, this is a very simple method that essentially takes in a string like one of these, and then it compiles the regular expression. That's what this does. And then it searches in that regular expression for the group, also known as that keyword, which we called ID, of ID. right? And that actually grabs it for us. So if we do get ID of any of these paths, like blog path 1, and then go so on and so forth, we see that that ID is 1. Now, as it relates to Django, this is obviously very important because then we can do stuff like post.objects.get ID equals to 1, and that is a query on our backend, right? Granted, I don't have post in here just yet, but what we can also do is that same thing, but for 2. And now we have the ID of 2. And again, grabbing what that ID is shows us that what we would end up querying in our backend is this right here. But what this should also show us is how it validates things prior to even doing one of these queries. Now, how does it do that? Well, it does it based off of what our parameters are in this regular expression. So going back to that get ID method, if I did get ID of that blog path 4, I'm actually even going to write it out. I'll write out blog/winter is coming for you Game of Thrones fans. And I press enter here. What is going to happen? What is it going to give me back? I hit enter. It says none type. So this is, in a way, a validation error showing me that this doesn't have an ID. So this is where Django can say, hey, let's raise an HTTP 404 or a page not found. Let's do that instead of even coming close to the object. Instead of doing something like post.objects.get and assuming that it somehow set the ID of equaling to winter is coming, it won't even get to that point, right? It already didn't validate up here with that regular expression. That alone is it. I mean, if you just understand that piece, knowing that whatever's in that regular expression turns into the keyword argument. So this right here turns into the keyword argument that's passed to your view. I'll get to that in a second. And you know that whatever's in here is validated against the path. If you know just those two things, you probably have a really good understanding of how regular expressions work. And you can go into our common regular expressions guide for Django URLs located right there. And that will actually show you a lot of these different regular expressions you may see in any given URL, such as username, slug, and so on. Now back into ours, we want to go a little bit further and improve how we get these items, right? So we can put that last one, the winter is coming one, we could put that into a try block. And then that way it gives me something like this. Does not have a matching ID. It's not raising an attribute error like it did. It's just saying, hey, we don't have anything that matches this, and boom, done. Now, again, that's a way of handling that error. Now, this has nothing to do with Django, but it does show us that those URLs are really clever because they use regular expressions. And that's also why I recommend most people just use regular expressions, even though Django has a few new features out that you could check out that don't require you to use regular expressions. So your question might be, now, how do I handle this one then? How do I get the slug, otherwise known as this piece right here? How do I extract that? Well, that regular expression is just slightly different. Notice instead of using the digits, it's using characters. So it's using characters and a dash. That's what that's for. And we're able to get everything that's a character and a dash, and it goes in there. And then that regular expression works. So if we do this one, I can bring it in here and I will be able to print out the slug for each one, or what I'm calling is the slug. It doesn't have to be called that, but we see that now it's treating this whole block as the keyword argument of slug, and that's coming in as, one is one of the keyword arguments as the winter is coming slug. So it actually matches both of those things. It's allowing us to get the digits as well as the slugs, which is really cool because that means then our our views can actually handle how those two things are done. So you can keep going through this and understanding that there's various ways on how you can extract different pieces of a URL, right? So like here, there's 2 slugs, and we can actually pull out those 2 slugs based off of the names that we're giving to them, right? So I give it a group name of slug2 and a group name of just slug, and then I just do a quick little search, grab that group and it pulls those things out. You can mix IDs with slugs, as we see here. That's an ID that only takes in digits, and then this one uses digits and characters, so you can grab both of those things. You can also just go ahead and mix argument names, right? So like right here, we've got a username. This has other attributes that the slug doesn't. It has a period in there. It has an @ sign and a plus sign. So those are different ways on how you might be able to grab the username. So this would be good for also emails. You could use this to actually get somebody's email in a username. Not that I recommend doing that, but using that @ sign and having the period, that will allow for those things to happen, much like we see in this path right here. Jon.Snow is the Night King is here. That does not sound like a good blog post for Jon Snow. But the cool thing is here is that these keyword arguments are related to how the regular expression is set up, but they aren't required. Like you don't actually have to name it anything in here. You don't have to give it a name. You can omit that completely and it will still match the regular expression. But when it comes to Django URLs, you definitely want to have a named keyword in there. So name keyword as in the name expression. So when we go down through URLing, it's not a whole lot different than this. Like you see all of these things here. There's the path and then the various view that's going to handle whatever that URL is, right? So what Django does in the URLs, let's actually look at those URLs. What it does is it takes whatever that regular expression is and whatever path is being sent to it, and then it sends that to its corresponding view, right? Or if you're using a function-based view, it would be, like detail view, and it takes in a request and then your keyword argument. So in this case, it would be ID. In some cases, it might be slug or PK and so on, right? So you would actually pass those things in because by default, that's what's happening here. Okay, so the next part of this is actually seeing it in action. Now, if you're from older versions of Django, you'll know that Django used to use just this URL parameter or the URL method to actually design these URLs. That's changed to being RE path or regular expression path versus the simple version called path, the one that comes in by default. We are going to use the regular expression path as you see here. Now this code is coming directly from here, but I already have views and whatnot already set up to handle those things. The view itself and the template itself don't actually matter, but you do want to make sure that you have them on here. So what I want to do is jump into my project and go to one of these places. So if I go into my blog and hit enter, I see I got a template does not exist. That's a good sign. The next thing is I'm going to go to an ID. Let's say blog post with an ID of 1, and I hit enter. What I get right here is this attribute error. Hey, wait a minute. I've seen an attribute error before. Let's look back into the shell and scroll up a little bit. That attribute error came right here. None type object does not have the attribute group. Attribute error. That means that I have something wrong with my regular expression as it relates to the view. So what is the thing that's wrong? I have it named as ID. This is looking for PK or slug. Now, why is it looking for those things? Well, that's because it's a built-in Django detail view. It's a generic view to actually handle that URL by default. So by default, Django is looking for, I'll keep these commented out, either PK as a digit, right? Or it's looking for slug as some sort of slug field like this, as we've seen on our blog post. So that's what it's looking for by default. So what we need to do is accept the fact that we wanted to change what our keyword argument was, what our regular expression keyword argument was that's going to this view. I want to change it. I don't want to go with the default. Now you can, there's nothing wrong with that, but I want to show you how it's done. And there's two ways. I'll show you how to do it in a class-based view, which is what I'm about to do. And I'm going to also show you how to do it in a function-based view. And even though I've already kind of showed you how to do it anyway. So what I'm going to do is in here is override the method getObject. It takes in self-args and keyword args. And this is going to return post.objects.get of some kind. Now, I don't usually want to do something like this. You don't want to do this because if you do an ID of something that does not exist, it raises some sort of error. So to augment that or to circumvent that, we are going to do get object or 404. This is a nice little convenient method to just say get object or 404 of the post and then whatever parameter we're going to be passing it. Now, by default, it's the primary key, right? Or it's the slug field. It's looking for one of those two things. Now, slug field might not actually exist on your model. It might not. PK definitely does because that is built in by default to every Django model. But then again, so is ID. Well, in fact, you may know this, you may not. ID equals to PK. Those are the same field. It's just Django isn't treating them the same in this case because you can actually change what your primary key is. That's what PK stands for. Now, the question should be is how do I actually get the past ID? How do I get the URL ID, right? How do I grab that? Well, it's actually really simple in a class-based view. You just do URL. Let's do URL ID equals to self.get, rather not get, but self.keyword_args.get ID. Now, this is the named regular expression ID. Again, going back in here, there's that named ID, named regular expression. That's it right here. Contrast that with a function-based view, and it's not a whole lot different. But function-based views don't have built-in things to them, so you have to write all of them out. Now, a regular function-based view, let's say it's a list view. We'll do a list view first. We'll change the name of it in just a second. Is going to be something like that. Let's call this list view. And it's going to return render, and it's going to take in the request, your template, and your context. I'm not going to actually implement this view, but that's what it does. The detail view can actually look the same, much like above, right? The two class-based views aren't a whole lot different. Here's the detail view. But the biggest difference with this detail view is that it can actually pass in an argument here. It can pass in the URL's keyword argument or arguments, however many you have. You can actually pass those in to your function-based view here as the actual name itself. So in this case, it's ID. Again, by the default, it would be primary key, but we're going off of ID. And of course, if you wanted multiple like slug and username, let's say, for instance, you had multiple or you didn't have multiple, but you wanted to be prepared in the future for multiple, that's how you do it in a function-based view and a class-based view. Not a whole lot different. You would just say URL slug equals to the slug URL username equals to the username. Okay, so that is it. We actually don't have a whole lot more to talk about with this. Other than maybe the questions you may have. So if you have some, please let us know in the comments. I will want to challenge you with something is how do I actually implement this specifically with this model? Notice I have a user, I have a slug, and by default there is an ID field already in here, as you should absolutely know by now, but if you don't, there it is. I want to see if you can actually implement this, being that getObject or 404 takes in all three of those parameters. That's a little challenge for you. And of course, I'll give you a hint. It has something to do with changing our URLs and possibly seeing what common regular expressions are out there and exist. So it looks like I have a little issue with my keyword args here. Sorry, there's supposed to be 2 stars for those keyword arguments. And now I get that template doesn't exist, but the URL passes. Again, the other cool thing about this is just the last part, is if I write out something like ABC, it doesn't match that URL expression, so it gives me this page not found. This is not an error. This is done on purpose. Really cool, really good stuff. That is how Django URLs work with regular expressions. Thanks so much for watching about regular expressions. Hopefully you got a lot out of this. I really want to do more of these little videos where they're short, they're kind of to the point, and they cover a concept that might be in the gray area for you. So if you have one of those, please let me know in the comments below and upvote the ones that you really want to see. We'll continuously do these things if we hear from you guys. If we don't, we'll just go back to building those super long content videos that some of you love and some of you, well, let's see, don't like as much. All right, well, thanks so much for watching. We'll see you guys in the next one.